So I met Rebecca at COP28, where we met at one of the side events during the UN Climate Summit. And I took note that the kind of things that you're up to at your company might be something that our audience would want to hear about. And here we are. So I'm pleased that you've joined us. What is the investment plan, just to get right to it? Because I was stunned by the kind of figures you were sharing with me a moment ago. This is obviously a relatively positive environment for investing in clean energy now with the IRA and sort of interesting climate change. But you were at this before the IRA came along, and now you're doubling down on your efforts. So give us a quick sketch of what you're planning.
Well, I'd love to give you an update, particularly in context of Dubai and COP28 and the conversation that you started this morning with Ali Zadi, talking about our ambition, our need to 3x the deployment of renewables in the next decade or so in order to stay on our climate goals. Well, I'm really proud to say we want to do that in the next 4 years. And that for NextEra Energy Resources.
You're already at a reasonably high base. You're not starting from
I was going to say we're already the world's leader in renewable energy from the wind and sun, world leader in battery storage. And we want to deploy 36.5 to 46.5 gigawatts in the next 4 years. To put that in context, that's larger than almost every other utility holding company in the country today. And that would be 2.65 timesing what we already have installed in the next 4 years. If you just talk about Florida Power and Light Company, which is the largest rate-regulated utility in the country, we plan to go from it between now and 2033, so a little bit longer time horizon.
That's your parent company, is that right?
It's our sister company. So the large it's the largest rate utility in the U.S. It's going to go from 5 gigawatts of solar up to over 25 in the next 10 years. So really exciting trends across our sector in electricity, really driven by economics. So when we met in Dubai, we were really talking about the replacement cycle, retiring old, inefficient, high cost and high carbon emitting resources and replacing them with renewables. So we're doing that today and growing. And the reason why we're growing is in support of our customers who are deploying new manufacturing facilities that are electrifying. They're supporting technology growth that is so exciting and supporting U.S. global leadership. And they need renewable energy to do that, and we're here to help them.
What kind of CapEx commitment are you making for this kind of growth you're underlying for us?
It's in aggregate for our company over $100 billion in the next 4 years.
That's extraordinary, $100 billion.
Yes.
Can you tell us how much is balance sheet, how much might be coming from capital markets, and how much are you counting on from the kind of things that Ali Zaidi and his colleagues have put on the table?
I love that you go back to finance. So before I had this role, I was our chief financial officer, so I love to talk numbers.
Show me the money.
Roughly half of what we end up investing is covered by our cash from operations, which is terrific. So we already have investments that are able to capture that cash and reinvest in the business. And then the other half, we are going out to the capital markets in order to fund it.
And how much are you counting on for, again, the IRA or related credits to support what you're doing?
The IRA credits are super important. When you think about customers either retiring old generation or deploying new ones, the most important thing is that they find the least cost solution that is fast to deploy, that can meet their needs, and ideally is clean. And fortunately, with the IRA incentives, renewables are that in most parts of the U.S. today. And what's really good is we also have the advantage of an incentive specifically for storage, which before there was an incentive for storage, but only if you paired it with solar. Now there's a standalone incentive for storage, which really helps those resources become far more nimble. We are deploying a significant amount of storage. You know, we just talked to our investors earlier this week, and I acknowledged to them, my biggest surprise, you know, from the seat that I sit in, is how much storage has become adopted.
Is it all lithium ion at the moment?
It is predominantly lithium ion. We're looking at some of the longer duration forms of storage, which are going to be particularly more important in the latter part of this decade.
Sodium, iron, what are you looking at?
Yes, sodium iron flow batteries, even pumped hydro facilities could be part of the solution. I think, you know, for all of us.
Close to prime time, the other alternatives? In the 4-year window?
Probably not the 4-year window. I would say they're closer to the latter part of this decade, particularly for the longer duration forms of storage. You need to get to the point where you've already deployed 4 hours, and you need something longer in order to justify the cost.
Now, there is a project in Utah supported by the DOE for hydrogen storage. Is that something you're looking at as for multi-season storage?
Potentially. Hydrogen, I think, is a longer-term technology. For the power sector, there are lower-cost alternatives to serve from a power customer perspective. But if you think about overall energy, whether it's in the U.S. or globally, about 20% of end energy consumption is electricity. The rest of the 80% are fossil forms of generation today. So hydrogen, to me, is more likely to be a lower-cost solution for the things that depend on a molecule today. And hydrogen, whether it's in the form of sustainable aviation fuel or other derivative products, could be very exciting. We are actually producing SAF, which I also noted.
Are you? You're one of the few in the room, I guess.
I know. I was like, there's at least one of us in here.
What's the business angle there? Just on a side note, why are you involved with SAF?
We are providing all of the renewable energy to a particular facility that is producing SAF. And so they're using green hydrogen. So we're the electricity provider in order for them to create the hydrogen that then they turn into fuel for airplanes.
So you're the energy provider. There's a SAF company that's doing the SAF and dealing with the airlines and stuff.
Yes.
Got it. You mentioned in passing industry, and of course the electricity as a final fuel is about 20% of the global energy mix, roughly the same in the US. But we know the trend line. Electrify everything. That's sort of the mantra now for dealing with climate change. Electrify everything, decarbonize energy systems, and for the stuff that you can't get to, maybe use things like hydrogen or other derivative fuels like ammonia. What this means, though, is we're going to have to increase that 20%, 50%, 60%, depending on whose models we look at, dramatically increase electrification of the economy, including in industry.
Yep.
And that means a lot more energy, right?
Yes.
So can you talk about what you're hearing from industrial customers who are very comfortable and familiar with natural gas? And in America, we have, one could call it an advantage or disadvantage depending on your point of view, but from certainly an economic perspective, the advantage of cheap and basically 100 years plus of natural gas, that in some ways is the enemy of electrification, that it makes it very hard to have an inexpensive and ubiquitous incumbent that works really well. And so what are you hearing from your industrial customers on the prospects of electrifying industrial processes?
I think it's a mix. And I think you said this in at least one of the conversations today, that customers really want to be clean, but they don't necessarily want to pay a premium for it. So many of our more advanced partners in industry are looking to work with their customers that are willing to pay for the premium that it requires in order to end up with a fully decarbonized solution. Fortunately, there are some electrification of their processes that are now getting to the point of being economic, particularly in areas in the middle part of the U.S. where there's abundant clean energy and a lot of low-cost electricity that goes along with that. Those are the easier areas to decarbonize. So when I look at the growth of our business contributing to that 36 to 46 gigawatts in the next 4 years, there are quite a number of industrial customers in that customer base. And more of that is because of economics than for strictly decarbonization. So it's that nice 1-2 punch where they can get good economics and decarbonization and ultimately build a value proposition around it.
What are you finding with interest in heat batteries, a novel technology that a number of companies, Rondo and Tora, there's some startups in this space, others are coming up. I wrote about this in a provocative cover. They got a lot of the hydrogen people, they got their noses out of joint, because I pointed out that hydrogen is not the only game in town when it comes to transforming industry, and they didn't care for that argument. But I'm hearing a lot more interest in things like thermal batteries.
We're interested in both of those. And in fact, we're actually working with Antora to build a test pilot facility, working with an ethanol company to bring them clean heat as part of their solution. And it's benefiting from super low cost electricity that's providing the ultimate heat solution that they need. It's also benefiting from some important incentives that were enabled in the Inflation Reduction Act. So I'm very excited about it. I am not super worried about one technology needing to be very focused on whether or not they win against another one. I generally am one of those believers that you need all of the above in order to accomplish the big goals that we have, the big challenges that we have ahead of us.
We have a few questions from the floor for which I thank my audience. One of them is additionality in a sense. That is, if it weren't for the IRA credits, how much of this would you still be doing? Would you be doing 1x, 2x, not 3x, as it were?
It's a challenge to answer that question because I think it really comes down to economics. And two things happened at the same time. The Inflation Reduction Act was passed, and we saw a significant amount of inflation in our underlying costs.
You're talking about supply chain inflation.
Supply chain inflation, disruption, everything that happened post-COVID, also some tariff and some geopolitical.
And the interest rate environment?
And the interest rate environment. So we went from renewables, and I would say both wind and solar, in the $20 to $30 a megawatt hour. I know not everybody talks in megawatt hours here, but to put it in context, it roughly doubled over the last couple of years, in spite of the extension of incentives and the expansion of incentives for solar. So I think for those that were doing investing in renewable energy as part of the replacement cycle, a doubling of the cost without the incentives having been extended would have been a big challenge. Now, when we're seeing growth and we're seeing new loads, new generation needing to be built to serve this new load, renewables, even with the incentives being pared back, would have been competitive with those technologies. But they help a lot, right? At the end of the day, it's helpful to have a competitive cost of energy supply.
What about transmission? We know there's a vast overhang of projects trying to get on the transmission system. There's been some push from the Department of Energy to think about fast-tracking some projects or even grid-enhancing technologies, so-called GETs, reconductoring, dynamic line ratings, and so on. Where are you on that? How hopeful are you about some of the things that don't require long waiting times to build brand new transmission?
Well, let me give you a couple of statistics as to why this really matters and why I want it to be successful. Just in the last 7 years, we in the industry have deployed 140 gigawatts of new generating resources. We expect to do about 450 in the next 7 years. So enormous amount of growth. If you believe some of the forecasts that we believe, we're talking about a doubling of the generating capacity installed in the US in the next 2 decades. We need transmission to support that build out. So we're another one of those. We need all of the above. Reconductoring, line ratings. We are absolutely involved in transmission. And I think as we look forward, what will be the secret sauce to be able to meet some of these demands going forward? It is going to be able to bring transmission with load interconnection with the generating resources all together. Specifically to your question, we've already done some pilots ourselves with investing in some of the more high capability transmission lines and realized a cost savings relative to the alternative. When you have a lighter line weight, then you can actually use a cheaper transmission structure, which saves in the cost our customers ultimately pay. It's pretty exciting.
And one question we have has to do with trade-offs. And there are NIMBYs and YIMBY. I mean, the YIMBYs are rare, but the NIMBYs and the bananas people build absolutely nothing anywhere near anybody. It's still a phenomenon. How do you deal with the land use challenge of expanding renewables?
Listen, one of the key things that we do as we go to build a resource anywhere in the country is make sure that we're building relationships with the local communities. We want to be in a place where the community actually wants us to be there. And fortunately, for the projects that we're building, we are bringing significant economic development to these communities. Land lease payments, taxes, community investments that we make as part of our investments. So there are a lot of places in this country that are very happy to have us come and be a part of their community.
What's the hardest place to work? Where have you had the toughest challenge?
I don't know that I want to characterize any one individual place as hard. There can be pockets in a lot of different places. Sometimes we're able to overcome that by engaging with the community and helping them understand what we can bring, and then being good neighbors once we're there and letting others talk about how that value has come about. But there are certain places where they have decided they don't want the resources that we want to bring to market there. We go somewhere else. And I think that's unfortunate, but it's a practical reality of needing to build so much. We need to pick our spots of where we're going to invest.
And what would happen if we were to see a change in administration, which is, obviously we'll know in November, and a possible different direction of policy? Challenge to the IRA. Certainly there's been negative comments made by President Trump about wind and solar and so on. How much would that affect your investment decisions? Just from a fiduciary perspective, not getting into the politics of it, what do you need to tell your own investors, or what did you tell them about the risks in your plan?
So if you look back over many, many, many years, so many administrations, many makeups of Congress, you've seen a very strong underlying support for renewables. It was unfortunate that renewable clean energy sustainability got more politicized over the last decade or so. But the reality is the support is quite cross aisle. Which is, I think, a surprise to many. Even if you go and you poll and you talk about clean energy and renewable energy, it actually polls really well. And I know many of you know from the Inflation Reduction Act, many of the dollars that ultimately went from the government action related to to that law in particular, went to Republican jurisdictions. So I actually think the economic development and the benefits that the law has brought would make it very difficult to repeal, certainly in whole. Could there be at parts? Maybe, but I'm not deeply concerned about that. We're probably spending more time thinking about tariffs, thinking about the geopolitical tension, making sure our supply chain is resilient and diversified across a variety of different policy regimes. That was another part of your conversation this morning with Ali Zadi that I thought was interesting. Anything that brings incremental uncertainty or incremental cost in the form of tariff just raises the price for customers. So we like stability and visibility as much as possible and de-risk so that we can bring low-cost solutions to market.
Do you see, on that note, just to finish on, declining, I mean, we're at a time of glut in the solar industry. The excess capacity in China is phenomenal compared to the global demand and likely to continue based on our reporting from China. And yet we also see higher prices in the U.S. significantly, in part because of those
2x.
Tariffs. Right,
More than 2x.
Exactly. What is the outlook for solar prices in the U.S. and the supply chain, given that it will take quite a while to reinvent the Chinese supply chain here in America?
Well, unfortunately, there are both new tariff actions and new trade actions that have come up just in the last couple of months. So that uncertainty is going to keep the price higher than I believe it should be longer term as a result. But hopefully over time, this supply that is getting built in the U.S., that is getting built around the world, will get to a much more appropriate price where the suppliers are actually making an appropriate return and we're getting a low-cost product that can bring down energy costs for all of you in the room and others out in the rest of the economy.
So, sunnier days are ahead. You heard it here. Ruulke, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.